Happy National Preparedness Month and National Food Safety Education Month. Welcome to our webinar on the role of school nutrition directors in school safety efforts, which includes security, emergency management, and preparedness activities. This event is part of the REMS TA Center's role-based webinar series, through which we've been exploring the various roles within schools and school districts and how they can contribute to a safe and supportive learning environment all year round. My name is Allison Curtis, and I serve as the Director of Information and Product Management at the REMS TA Center. As with all of our webinars in this series and beyond, there are a few tips for engaging with the platform and us throughout the event. We've placed links to relevant online resources in the web links pod and a resource list in the downloads pod. Please feel free to explore and share them with your colleagues. You are welcome to pose any questions in the Q&A pod or communicate any technical difficulties that you experience. We will be answering questions following the presentation and as time permits. After this live event, please send any questions for us to the help desk at info@remstacenter.org. And we will be hosting a web chat on our community of practice for 30 minutes after this webinar to respond to any unanswered questions. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available in archived form on our site within 7 business days after this event. I am very happy to introduce our guest speakers for today from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Charles Fortner is a food safety professional with over 25 years of experience providing food safety and processing related technical assistance to federal and state program participants. At the USDA Food and Nutrition Service, her projects cover a broad spectrum of food safety activities across child nutrition and other FNS programs, including food safety education and training initiatives, USDA Foods compliance support, food allergy, and food defense efforts. Previously, Charles spent 14 years with the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service, where she served as communications manager for the National Organic Program and as a dairy products marketing specialist with AMS dairy programs. With dairy programs, she developed and maintained domestic dairy product quality standards and specifications. Charles began her career with the USDA as a nutritionist with the Food and Nutrition Service, working with the Child Nutrition Labeling Program and providing nutrition and food science-based technical assistance to child nutrition program participants. Before moving to the National Capital Area, Charles worked as a public health environmentalist for the Mississippi State Department of Health, performing environmental health inspections for food service establishments and licensure inspections for child care facilities. Charles earned a Bachelor of Science degree in dairy manufacturing and a Master of Science degree in food science and technology from Mississippi State University. As the daughter of a consulting food technologist and the granddaughter of a dairy farmer, she grew up with a strong interest in food science and a keen awareness of food safety principles. Brian McCall is the Director of the Office of Emergency Management with the USDA Food and Nutrition Service. He has 25 years of demonstrated leadership and experience at all levels of state and federal nutrition assistance programs, including 20 years with FNS. He has served in many key roles with FNS, including as a SNAP branch chief and as acting regional program director for both SNAP and WIC, and acting deputy regional administrator. Brian has vital experience in developing operational strategies for all program areas within FNS, including SNAP, child nutrition, financial management, civil rights, and human resource management. With his work in the Southeast Regional Office, he has extensive experience in responding to numerous major disasters and in developing and executing continuity of operations plans. Brian earned a bachelor's degree from Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia. And it is wonderful to have both Brian and Charles here today. Here is our agenda for today's webinar. First, we'll provide an overview of the importance of collaborative planning in school emergency operations plan development, also known as EOPs. Then our guest presenters will provide a closer look at food safety, food defense, and disaster feeding. The REMS TA Center will discuss how school nutrition directors can enhance the 6-STEM planning process. A question and answer session will follow, and then we will end with key resources to support your work. And as I mentioned, we'll jump over to the community of practice after this webinar for a 30-minute web chat. So log in or register for the community of practice now so you're ready to participate. We'd like to get started with a poll question. Had you heard of the REMS TA Center before today's session? If so, in what context? Have you attended a live training in person at your site? Have you attended one of our virtual trainings, like a webinar right now, or another virtual training by request? Have you requested technical assistance, downloaded one of our resources, met us at a national conference, or in some other capacity? And if you select other, please share how in the Q&A pod. We'd love to hear from you. It looks like almost 50% of you have attended a virtual training. And then the close second is others. So I look forward to seeing some of those responses and how you've interacted with us before today. A third of individuals have downloaded a resource, and a little less have attended our live trainings and requested technical assistance. We can end the poll. Thank you for letting us know how you've interacted with us before. If this is your very first time meeting us, welcome. The U.S. Department of Education Office of Safe and Supportive Schools administers the REMS TA Center to help build the preparedness capacity, including prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery efforts of schools, school districts, and institutions of higher education with their community partners at the local, state, and federal levels. REMS TA Center staff members are available via email or phone to respond to your requests for technical assistance on emergency operations plan development. Communities and families expect schools and school districts to keep their children and youth safe from threats, including crime and violence, as well as hazards like natural disasters, disease outbreaks, and hazardous material spills. In collaboration with their community partners, schools and school districts can plan for these potential threats and hazards through the creation of an emergency operations plan, or an EOP. The school EOP describes how people, not just students, but also teachers, administrators, staff, and visitors, as well as property, will be protected on and off campus. It also details who is responsible for carrying out specific actions before, during, and after an emergency. It identifies the personnel, equipment, facilities, supplies, and other resources that are available, and it outlines how all actions will be coordinated. While school EOPs vary in their contents, as they are customized according to the school building, they generally contain 3 main sections. The basic plan section provides an overview of the school's approach to emergency operations, such as training, exercises, and information collection. The functional annexes section presents how the school will manage common essential functions like evacuations, communications, continuity of operations before, during, and after an emergency. And then the threat and hazard specific annexes section identifies protocols that schools will follow to address the specific emergencies like hurricanes, wildfires, tornadoes, food contamination, and power outages. School EOP should be developed by a school-level emergency planning and response team with membership from the district's core planning team. The formation of this multidisciplinary planning team is step 1 of the 6-step planning process outlined within the Guide for Developing High-Quality School Emergency Operations Plans, known as the School Guide, and the role of districts in developing high-quality school emergency operations plans, known as the District Guide. These guides may be used by core planning teams to create new plans as well as to revise and update existing plans. You can access these guidance documents in the web links pod. Well, why collaborate? Because the planning and the development of a school EOP require the expertise from a diverse group of people so that it reflects the diverse needs of the school community. Everyone has expertise to contribute: school administrators, transportation directors, teachers, school facility managers, IT specialists, school nurses, community engagement specialists, school psychologists, mental health professionals, families and parents, and of course, school nutrition directors, which is why we are here today. School nutrition directors have expertise in both food safety and food defense. Food safety protects against unintentional contamination, which may be a result of inappropriate handling, storage, or delivery of food or water, or an emergency like power failure that may lead to spoiled food or the loss of a clean water supply. Charlsa will speak about food safety later, as well as food defense. Food defense, on the other hand, protects against intentional contamination. This is the introduction of chemical, physical, or biological agents into food, water, or facilities by individuals seeking to harm students or staff. Another term is bioterrorism. School nutrition directors also oversee or have a responsibility in child nutrition programs, school nutrition programs, USDA food service operations, and delivery and distribution. They also understand security measures in the context of food and school cafeterias, warehouses, central kitchens, and school nutrition personnel. Food, as well as food-related areas, places, and operations may be vulnerable or at risk to threats and hazards. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration defines a foodborne illness outbreak as when 2 or more people get the same illness from eating contaminated food from a common source. They are relatively uncommon in schools, but when they do occur, they are most often associated with norovirus, a very contagious stomach illness that can make you sick. Another example of foodborne illness outbreaks that are more often seen outside of the school setting include Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria. As I just covered, bioterrorism, or the intentional contamination of food, is a possible threat. Intelligence reporting indicates that there is an ongoing interest by bad actors on using chemical and biological agents to contaminate food. And schools can plan for these hazards and threats in their emergency operations plans. Food and feeding students and other members of the school community should be considered for all hazards. For example, how will the school ensure continuity of feeding and food distribution during an emergency and in immediate aftermath? How will the school ensure students receive meals if there's a prolonged closure? How will food services be resumed after an emergency, depending on the scale of an incident? How will the school make sure food is physically secure? What food supplies will be needed to provide for the needs of students and staff during shelter in place? These considerations should all be addressed in functional annexes in the school EOP. So now I'd like to check with all of you and get some feedback via a poll. What role do you play in school safety, security, emergency management, and preparedness? Are you part of EOP development, incident response, training or exercises, recovery, or perhaps you have another role? And if you click that other role, we'd love to hear in the Q&A pod what that is, how you would describe that. Looks like close to 50% of today's participants are involved in EOP development. About 40% are involved in training and exercises, a third in incident response, 15% in recovery, and 23% other. great to hear how you are all involved. So now our guest presenters will explore disaster feeding, food safety, and food defense at schools. Brian, I'll hand things over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. It's good to see the variety of roles that are represented on the webinar today. Should be a good audience for this information. So again, I'm Brian McCall. I'm the Director of the Office of Emergency Management with the USDA's Food and Nutrition Service. I just wanted to start off with a little introductory information about our agency in case you were not familiar with FNS. FNS is comprised of a national office and 7 regional offices who partner with federal, state, and non-governmental organizations to implement our 15 nutrition assistance programs. The FNS Office of Emergency Management, where I work, is responsible for coordinating information reporting with states and other federal agencies on all disaster incidents involving FNS nutrition assistance programs. We facilitate disaster funding requests for the reimbursement or purchase of USDA foods used in disaster congregate feeding or household feeding. We also assist with ordering and monitoring delivery of infant formula for disaster relief. The Office of Emergency Management also uses state and national data to post significant disaster response information on the FNS public website. Moving on to the importance of our food nutrition service programs and services, by implementing our FNS programs and services, you are a part of a combined effort that serves 1 in 4 Americans each year. USDA's budget for fiscal year 2022 is $198 billion. The Food and Nutrition Service and its programs account for 74% of the department's total budget. And prior to COVID, FNS provided over $80 billion annually in direct benefits to families across the country. So the work that we all do is vital to the health and safety of children and families in need of our services, but we also must inspire public confidence in the programs we administer. Emergency operations plans for schools are similar to other types of environments where disasters or emergencies can occur. Proper planning is thinking about what your plan should include before, during, and after an emergency. A good plan evolves from prevention, mitigation, and protection to response and recovery. Any lessons learned then feed back into future planning to improve the execution and delivery of relief efforts. So prevention and mitigation is hopefully what most of you are considering now, unless you've recently experienced a disaster emergency, because disaster management is a process of effectively preparing for and reducing the impact of any potential disasters or emergencies. And planning involves strategically organizing resources to lessen the harm that disasters cause. It also involves a systematic approach to managing the responsibilities of disaster prevention. The Office of Emergency Management with Food Nutrition Service works regularly with FEMA, or the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to ensure communities and schools are prepared at all stages of an incident, before, during, and after any threat or hazard. So this slide just shows you one example of a scenario which requires planning at all stages. In this case, the threat or hazard is a fire. So the primary goal before a fire occurs is prevention, such as providing fire prevention training to all students and staff, storing combustible materials in fireproof containers, and conducting regular OSHA assessments. During a fire, the goal shifts to protecting students and staff. So you would want to evacuate all persons from the building, account for all personnel and students, and address any health needs. After it's over, the goal is to restore a safe and healthy learning environment. So you'd want to repair and clean up from the physical damage, address any mental health needs or follow up physical health needs, and communicate with all your stakeholders and partners. So your emergency plan should include specific objectives and practice drills for all 3 of these stages. Your individual school or school district's planning process should account for a wide range of possible threats. These can be human-caused, such as an active shooter. They can be biological hazards, such as a train derailment or chemical leak. They can be natural hazards like a hurricane, tornado, or earthquake. And they can be technological hazards, which we're seeing more now, cyber attacks or ransomware attacks. Your school or school district's basic emergency plan should account for survival for at least 3 days with supplies that include food and water. And a few things for schools and school districts to consider with all of these different kinds of threats. Refrigeration is necessary for the safe storage of many school foods and is vulnerable to power outages. Cold and shelf-stable foods are both vulnerable to flooding, so food storage locations and warehouses should consider securing backup generators and fuel in advance of any potential disaster. Program operators with large freezers should consider securing frozen nitrogen as a backup. Because disruptions to power, infrastructure, and staffing for schools, daycares, adult daycares, and homeless shelters will disrupt meal service. Homeless children are eligible for free meals in all child nutrition programs, and any adjacent unimpacted areas may request flexibilities to serve impacted children. And the summer food service program may also be an option during many types of closures related to these different kinds of disasters. Now I want to focus on ways in which the Food and Nutrition Service is able to feed families during disasters. This slide is kind of a busy slide, but it gives you information about the stages and types of disaster feeding that FNS offers. Each type of USDA disaster nutrition assistance is able to meet survivors' needs, but it's important to understand the differences and where they most effectively fall on the disaster response timeline. Typically, USDA Foods for Congregate Feeding is the first type of response provided as shelters are put in place before or during an emergency. Household feeding may be appropriate if impacted communities are isolated or do not have easy access to food sources. In recent years, emergency response organizations have requested less USDA foods than before due to increased private donations, as well as previously established purchase contracts. However, when the situation is right, USDA foods can have an important support role in a disaster response. So once families are back in their homes or able to prepare meals and stores are open again, then the Disaster Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or DSNAP, can be provided as another type of FNS response. DSNAP must be requested by the state agency and approved by FNS, and it's important to note that a state must first receive a presidential disaster declaration for individual assistance before the state can request to operate a DSNAP. With the addition of administrative waivers or flexibilities, there are 3 primary types of FNS disaster assistance when you include USDA Foods and DSNAP. States may request administrative waivers before, during, or after a disaster strikes, depending on the scenario. Using USDA Foods is often the first type of disaster response, and there are 2 types of emergency feeding involving USDA Foods. The first type is congregate feeding, where states have the authority to use foods from child nutrition programs for congregate feeding. The second type of emergency feeding is household distribution, and for household distribution, FNS must approve the use of USDA foods. This may occur in remote areas or when households experience challenges traveling to congregate feeding sites. And these are just some examples of administrative waivers and flexibilities that FNS provides to state agencies across all of our programs, such as allowing the same feeding location for multiple schools, offering the free rate to all schools and emergency shelters, waiving missing meal components, allowing WIC substitutions, and allowing hot foods to be purchased with SNAP benefits, and hot foods are not normally allowed. So just a little more information about the DSNAP program. The third type of disaster assistance that FNS offers is DSNAP, and states must decide whether to operate a DSNAP program and then seek approval from FNS. States pick sites for households to apply for disaster SNAP in or near localities that have experienced disasters. Planning and implementing a large-scale DSNAP operation can sometimes take several weeks to a month or more, so it's important to consider the other types of FNS assistance available first. DSNAP is a separate program from the regular SNAP program, and DSNAP usually only provides 1 month of benefits to households impacted by disasters. The FNS Office of Emergency Management is working to increase awareness of underserved populations and their specific needs during disasters, as well as consider disaster response through the lens of racial equity. This ensures that all households receive the maximum amount of support during disasters or other incidents. And special populations could include children who normally receive free meals at school who may not have the same access to meals at home, households with no internet access, and households without a vehicle. Wanted to talk briefly about equity, USDA's focus on equity, and give you some of the populations that the department is trying to serve. So equity is the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals, including individuals who belong to underserved communities that have been denied such treatment in the past. And there's some examples of underserved communities on the slide here. In order to design equitable disaster nutrition assistance for underserved populations, we all have to connect with our communities and recognize individuals who may identify with one or more of these populations. Systematic racial inequities in housing and urban planning can reduce healthy food access and increase exposure to power outages, floods, and environmental pollution during emergencies. Culturally appropriate relationship building with tribal leaders will help address a tribe's needs, experiences, and expectations regarding emergencies. It's important that everyone feels welcome at a shelter regardless of their religious affiliation or lack thereof. So just remember that faith-based and religious communities may or may not be able to eat certain foods, and their needs should be included in planning disaster feeding efforts. To create an inclusive environment for LGBTQ populations, shelters and meal sites should consider revising intake forms to not ask for gender and use gender-inclusive language in communications and signage. For people with disabilities, work with leaders in the disability community to understand their specific needs. Also understand the specific needs of rural communities because they are especially vulnerable to disasters because of their distance from infrastructure, reliable communication, and community services. And finally, translate materials and messaging into the languages spoken in your community and involve immigrant, farm worker, and refugee community leaders in disaster planning. This is the FNS Disaster Resilience and Recovery Tool, and it's located on the FNS Disaster website, which we'll cover later in the webinar. For preparedness and resiliency, users can identify areas of highest need in the underserved communities data tab and overlay information such as historic hurricane tracks and flooding risks. The tool can also help determine communities that may need alternative emergency messaging due to disabilities, limited English capabilities, or lack of vehicle or internet access. For response and recovery, users can estimate how many households, schools, and retailers are in the disaster area. Additional data may be added, such as evacuation routes, FEMA open shelters, and infrastructure data like fire stations and state emergency operation centers. And also the site has live feeds of weather, including hurricanes, wildfires, earthquakes, drought, and also has COVID-19 cases. So this can be an important tool for your emergency plan as well. So that concludes my slides, and I'll turn it over to Charleston now.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everybody. My name is Charleston Fortner, and I am also with FNS, as Allison mentioned. We're going to switch gears a little bit from our emergency management team to our food safety team. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about food safety plans or contaminated food annexes and food defense planning in the school nutrition programs. Whoops, working all at once. So I just want to share one slide about kind of who we are and what we do. Our mission on the food safety team is to protect FNS program participants from foodborne illness. And we do this through 5 functions, kind of like our pillars. Agency support is providing food safety research to other FNS programs, such as USDA Foods in Schools or other child nutrition programs. Partnerships and collaborations includes our liaison work with other federal agencies and organizations like the Food and Drug Administration and the Centers for Disease Control. We fund research projects that are specific to food safety in our child nutrition programs, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of that research while we're here. I will also talk more about some of our education and instruction activities in food safety and food defense planning. And finally, expanded learning and outreach really touches on some of our deep dive immersion courses, including Produce Safety University, which some of you may know about. So Brian gave you a snapshot of the reach of FNS programs on the whole, but I wanted to share a few numbers about the National School Lunch Program specifically, since we're focusing on school nutrition today. So we're including 2019 numbers here because that was the last year that wasn't really touched by the pandemic, so would present something that was, or represent something that was more like a normal year. And in that year, the National School Lunch Program operated nearly 100,000 schools, and that equates to nearly 5 billion lunches, nearly 3/4 of which were free or reduced price meals. So for the year, these benefits were valued at about $14.2 billion. And just as an incidental note, probably not surprising to anyone, the pandemic raised the percentage of free or reduced price lunches up to about 93%. So we're talking about a lot of school lunches here, and what these numbers really tell us is that from a food safety perspective, school nutrition program operators are doing an excellent job with food safety. So I would say keep up the great work. So I want to mention a couple of research studies that we funded through our partners at the Center for Food Safety and Child Nutrition Programs that are specifically relevant to food safety or contaminated food annexes and to food defense. And again, this is some of the research that our office funds on food safety that are specific to child nutrition programs. So that keeps the finding relevant and timely for the audiences that we serve. So the first research highlights are about crisis management. And I'll mention that these studies have been published, so if you want to see the details, they are available. And I'm just going to share a few highlights with you today. So the purpose of this study was to examine crisis management plans and how they guided responses to COVID-19. So the center assembled a focus group of 63 school nutrition program participants for the research. And what they found was that about 1/3 of respondents did not have crisis management plans. Those that did had plans that addressed communication and contacts, documents and protocols. But what they lacked was information on sourcing challenges and service modes and logistics. And about 81% of plans did not cover a pandemic. So the center also did a study on food defense practices in school nutrition programs. So remember, when we talk about food defense, we're talking about intentional contamination or tampering with food. So this study looked at the practices used to prevent this type of activity. The study had a sample of 320 respondents from across 14 states. And the center found in this research that 68% of school districts and 66% of school nutrition programs were without a food defense plan. And 44% reported a lack of training in food defense. So now is probably a good time to highlight the importance of schools and school nutrition programs in responding to emergencies regardless of the type. Schools are critical in providing access to meals for children, a fact that has been readily apparent for the last couple of years. And sometimes we have to adjust our operations to continue to provide meals to children and being prepared to respond quickly by having plans in place for different emergencies. And that helps things to fall into place safely and much more efficiently. So having a plan is very important. We'll next take a high-level look at food safety plans, or contaminated food annexes. A comprehensive food safety plan ensures that food served in school meals programs are safe by controlling hazards that may occur during all points in food service. Some points that you often consider, like cooking and serving, and then some that you might not often think of, like packaging or receiving, or transporting if you use a central kitchen concept, or even providing meals for field trips, or something like that. So a truly effective food safety plan needs to be developed for a specific school nutrition program. By developing a food safety plan for the specifics of the school, that's your equipment, staff, physical location, etc., the number of hazards can be significantly reduced for that site. So I want to make sure I talk a little bit about the legislation that drives the requirements to have food safety plans. The Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act of 2004 implemented the requirement for a food safety program based on hazard analysis and critical control point principles for school nutrition programs. Now, we call that HACCP by pronouncing its acronym because it's a whole lot easier. So that's what I'll say from here on. In 2010, the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Act was amended to include the food safety requirements established in the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010 and the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act of 2004. And what that did is require school food authorities to implement a food safety program based on HACCP principles, but the food safety program must apply to all locations where food is stored, prepared, or served throughout the school. So this would then cover not only the cafeteria, but a breakfast in the classroom program or something of that nature. So there are 7 important principles in any HACCP program. We're not going to cover all 7 of these in detail today, but know that they all work together in lockstep. The important thing to remember about HACCP is that it's all about prevention. You find the hazards in your processes, a recipe perhaps, and then decide what points in your process will control the hazards and what limits to establish to control the hazards. Then you set up your monitoring procedures and determine what you're going to do if your critical limits aren't met, which is your corrective actions. You'll want to verify that this is all happening as it should, and finally have clear and accurate records and documentation, as those are essential to your HACCP program. So these 7 steps might seem a little bit daunting, but there's something called the process approach to HACCP, which makes things a little bit easier to understand and apply in your kitchens. The process approach was originally developed by the Food and Drug Administration for retail food establishments, and it categorizes food preparation into 3 broad categories based on how many times each menu item moves through the temperature danger zone. So what's the temperature danger zone? That's the temperature range between 41 degrees and 135 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's really that range where food is not cold enough nor hot enough to slow the growth of bacteria that might cause illness. And the categories? The 3 categories of food preparation that the process approach to HACCP covers include no-cook, same-day service, and complex. Sometimes the visual is helpful to make this a little simpler. So what would a no-cook food be? Think of something that begins in the refrigerator, returns to the refrigerator before service, and is served cold. Maybe that's a sandwich or some cut fruit or salad. Same-day service? That might be something like baked chicken. The preparation step is cooking, and it's immediately served hot. Complex sounds like it might be trickier, but it's not really. Think of something that you might prepare in steps. Do you cook dry beans a day ahead of time for your chili? Or perhaps you prepare a taco or a burrito filling a day in advance of serving those entrees, and you reheat it before you assemble and serve. That would be considered a complex process. You have to remember that this is specific to how you prepare meals at your school. And it will also change when you make changes to your processes or to your recipes. So 2 HACCP principles that I want to highlight for us today are establishing critical control points and critical limits, since we're talking about temperatures. Critical control points are those places in your process where you can control a hazard, like growth of a bacterial pathogen. Think of cooking or proper cooling or even time as a public health control. Critical limits then are the actual numerical minimums and maximums that are applied at that critical control point. They may mean ensuring and recording that our poultry reaches a safe internal temperature of 165 degrees, or maybe it's ensuring that our refrigerators are holding foods at 41 degrees or lower. Or maybe we're using time as a critical limit and we're discarding foods that aren't served after a certain number of hours. So switching to food defense for a moment. Again, food defense involves the protection of the food supply from deliberate or intentional acts of contamination. That might be an internal threat, like a student or school staff, or an external threat, such as tampering that happens during distribution or processing. Food defense plans are not required, but they are highly recommended. They're not the same thing as a food safety plan, but it is okay to include food defense in your existing food safety plan if it helps with implementation. The important message is that you've considered potential threats and you have a plan in place somewhere that you can access and put into use quickly. So as you're preparing your food defense plans, here are some points to consider. Who could potentially cause intentional food contamination? Sure, terrorists and activists, but it could also be a disgruntled employee or even a student in a school environment. Where might your school be vulnerable? You have to look at your whole process. Maybe that's somewhere in storage or transportation or in your receiving or your warehouse. What are some countermeasures that you could use to deter intentional actions? Again, that's looking at your processes, whether you're using a central kitchen or school kitchen, how you receive food items and how you store them and who has access to them. How can you and your school prepare for food defense? You need to train, you need to plan, drill, and repeat that periodically. And then where can you incorporate food defense into your food safety plan? This is where your standard operating procedures for your school come into play. You need to have instructions for identifying and verifying delivery drivers when you receive deliveries, instructions on how you limit access to cooked foods so that only the school nutrition staff have access, and things like instructions in your food storage procedures for how you secure foods at the end of the workday. And then I wanted to leave you with a few critical food safety points to always have in mind when you're planning or responding to any kind of emergency where you might need to serve food. You always want to consider the risk of contamination to food and water supplies. You always want to think about cross-contamination between surfaces and or locations. For example, if you're moving cases of food around from one location to another. And then time and temperature control for safety. If you don't have control over the temperature, remember that you can always consider time as a public health control. And then finally, what are some key interventions to keep your meals safe? Again, you want to maintain safe food temperatures and keep foods out of the temperature danger zone. Always practice good hand hygiene and use gloves properly. And the last point is to sanitize and disinfect your surfaces properly, and just be aware of whatever emergency conditions you're in. It might mean that you need to do all of these things more frequently. And I think with that, I'm turning this back over to Allison.
Thanks so much, Charlsa and Brian. Lots of great information shared on programs and plans and practices that can be implemented. We appreciate you joining and sharing all of this. Now I wanted to spend a little bit of time walking through about how school nutrition directors can enhance the 6-step planning process for EOP development. As we stated, school nutrition directors should be members of core planning teams. Their perspective will help take into account food-related resources, food prep and service areas, food safety and food defense practices, program operations, and more that impact the school community and make it more at risk or vulnerable to threats and hazards. The school nutrition director is not only a steward from the cafeteria workers and school nutrition staff group, but it also carries the safety and training messages from the core planning team back to those staff members. Assessments are an important source of information for identifying hazards and threats unique to the school community. This can include culture and climate assessments, capacity assessments, behavioral threat assessments, and site assessments, the latter of which examines the safety, security, accessibility, and emergency preparedness of the school buildings and grounds. So when you're conducting a site assessment, take into consideration the kitchens, the cafeterias, and food service areas. The school nutrition director or their staff can serve on the site assessment team and be involved in examining those areas. And school nutrition staff should also be included in culture and climate assessments. They may be able to provide information on problem behaviors and their own perceptions of safety based on their roles. School nutrition directors should participate in the development of goals and objectives for threats, hazards, and functions. Possible goals, which are broad general statements that indicate a desired outcome for contaminated food outbreaks, could be as follows. Before, prevent a contaminated food outbreak from occurring and create a culture of food safety at school. During an emergency, protect students, staff, and visitors from illness and meet the basic needs of the whole school community. And then after an emergency, the goal could be to restore food service operations. School nutrition directors may also provide insight on continuity of operations, recovery, security, and other functions. The planning team builds upon the goals and objectives created in step 3 and assigns courses of action that address the who, what, where, when, and how for achieving them. Together, they form annexes or portions of the EOP. And using scenario-based planning can help the planning team visualize both food safety and food defense emergencies, as well as other threats and hazards. School nutrition directors can help determine the steps that school nutrition personnel need to take in various incidents, including activating functions. The team develops a basic plan of the school EOP, formats the annexes, and reviews all sections in step 5. After the plan is approved by leadership, the team should securely share portions with community partners. School nutrition directors should have copies of or access to documents and information that would be included in the basic plan, including memoranda of understanding for food services, maps of cafeterias and food service areas, and flow charts of food delivery and distribution. Finally, the planning team needs to implement the EOP, which means providing the whole school community with training and opportunities for practice. School nutrition directors should take a lead role in training the school community, including teachers, bus drivers, students, and more on food safety. At a minimum, they should be present in food-related emergency exercises. They may take a role in evaluating or monitoring exercises as well. And as members of the core planning team, school nutrition directors will be able to contribute to the revisions to and maintenance of the EOP after an event, whether a real emergency or an exercise. And this is how planning teams can close the loop and ensure that the plan evolves to meet the needs of the whole school community. So with that, we'd like to enter into a Q&A session and answer questions that have been submitted to us. If there's anything that comes up, please submit your questions in the Q&A pod on your screen. Questions will be answered in the order in which they appear and as time permits. And I'll begin with a question that we've received. How can a director, and this is a question for both Charles or Brian to answer, how can a director of child nutrition better support district-wide safety and security measures?
I can jump in real quick. Don't have a really long answer for this, but I would say, the planning process is really a community effort. So the first thing you should do, I think, is let your district leadership and your school board know that you have a HACCP-based plan and that you have a food defense plan. And then just ask to be included in their relevant security discussions and be ready to let them know what you have to contribute. You really, again, just involving your child nutrition community in the planning process. And as Allison referred to earlier, just making your culture of food safety and preparedness, keeping that as part of your culture and just sharing that effort up to get your school district's buy-in.
Thanks, Charles. I agree and can add on that. Membership on the core planning team can enhance collaboration across the school and across the school district. It can assist with relationship building and just creating not only a culture of food safety, like Charles mentioned, but a culture of emergency preparedness across the board within the school. We have another question that came in. What training, and this question is for all of the guest presenters, which training should I be providing to my staff? And I can start, and Charlesa and Brian, you're welcome to add on. Definitely training on their roles and responsibilities in the plan, in the emergency operations plan. That is a great place to start. There are free trainings from the REMS-T Center on our website that we'll go over in the resources section that are both synchronous and asynchronous that can help with just emergency preparedness and capacity building in various emergency management topics. But, conducting exercises and having staff participate and practice the plan and practice their roles can also be a good learning opportunity as well. Is there anything from FNS?
Yeah, I agree. Any of the resources offered by the Red Cross, or there is an agency-wide website for emergency planning, www.ready.gov, that has a lot of good resources, particularly a page for educators and organizations to assist with emergency planning and writing your emergency plan. There are some tabletop exercises on both ready.gov and on the Red Cross website that would be useful just to have some practice scenarios as to what to do in different disasters or emergencies. So anything on the Red Cross site or ready.gov would be a good starting place for schools or school districts to start thinking about drafting an emergency operations plan. And I will either get those links dropped into the chat or drop them in the post chat that we have.
And I can just add on to that. Those are all great resources, and certainly REN-CA has some amazing things on emergency operations plans. But I can also recommend our Institute of Child Nutrition. We fund them through a grant and a couple of cooperative agreements. So the nice thing about their training is that it's free or almost free to participants. And they have a lot of different food safety resources and a lot of different types of formats. You know, there's some longer ones if you have a couple of days to spend writing your food safety plan or your HACCP plan for your school. But then there are some shorter ones where they've taken some of the larger trainings down to smaller, like 15-minute modules that you can do online. So definitely recommend them for all types of food safety training. And I think they're listed on our resources page.
Wonderful, thank you. And if you have more questions or we didn't get to your question, please join us for our post-webinar web chat on the community of practice. But I think this is a great segue into our final section of today's webinar, key sections to support your work. We wanted to highlight some resources from the REN-CA Center, USDA FNS, and other entities that may be used by school nutrition directors, as well as school safety leaders, planning team members, community partners, and other individuals who have a role or interest in school emergency management planning. So I'll hand things back over to Charlesa to speak.
Great, thanks, Allison. So there are a number of food safety resources on our website and our partner, the Institute of Child Nutrition's website. But there are two brand new ones that I wanted to highlight for you today. The first is the Emergency Response Pocket Guide that was actually launched back in April of this year to download and print, but it is soon going to be available in a printed hard copy version. So if you'd like to order your own spiral-bound copy of that to keep on hand at the ready, you'll soon be able to do that. It's free and it's available in both English and Spanish. And this pocket guide is really designed to help child nutrition program operators plan for and respond to emergencies, specifically such as power outages, water contamination, sewage issues, floods, and fires. And there's also a companion poster that accompanies that guide that covers assembling food safety emergency supply kits. So it's a quick and easy reference to help you put together the things that you would need immediately to respond to some of these emergencies. Things like contact lists and plans, hand washing supplies, protective gear, cleaning supplies, food handling items, and some general safety supplies. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is, well, I just mentioned it, the new HACCP workshop from the Institute of Child Nutrition. So this is really a new resource for anyone who would like some focused help with writing or revising their food safety plans. So the course is called, well, the workshop is called Writing, Revising, and Updating a HACCP-Based Food Safety Plan for Schools. And it's a 2.5-day workshop. So it's a workshop where directors would actually go somewhere else, and that would provide them with time to focus on really looking at their food safety plans and making improvements to them. It's a combination of instruction and individual writing periods, but it's also got collaborative and interactive time built in for participants to discuss their plans with peers and get some feedback. And at the end of that workshop, participants would leave with the complete or completely revised food safety plan that incorporates HACCP principles. So we're really excited about that one. think it goes to Brian.
All right. So this is the FNS disaster site where the resilience and recovery tool that I mentioned earlier is located. So this site has many other disaster-related resources for individuals, for local agencies such as schools, as well as for government agencies. So states, tribal nations, and program operators can use this tool to identify areas of the most need, tailor your disaster responses, and allocate resources. So we have some pandemic-related resources on here. We have all of the FNS response to COVID-19. We have your regional office contacts. We have some FEMA links that will allow you to locate your individual state and local emergency operation centers, as well as all of the different types of FNS disaster response for our programs that I covered earlier. Allison?
Thanks, Brian and Charles. Great resources. And to close out, the REMS-T Center also has some resources for you all. Earlier this year, we released a new fact sheet in collaboration with the Food and Nutrition Service and Food Safety and Inspection Service. It's titled Food Safety and Food Defense, Developing a Contaminated Food Annex. That fact sheet is available in our web links pod. We also have some other tools and resources. SiteAssess is our free mobile application used to conduct site assessments, as we discussed in step 2. And then we offer a few training opportunities, a 30 to 45-minute online course on developing a food contamination annex, and then a specialized training package that has a 60-minute module with a presentation, instructions, tabletop exercise, and resource list on developing a food contamination annex. And so you can use the contents of that to conduct trainings on site or virtually with your team. And then we also offer a publication and archived webinar on planning for continuity of feeding and food operations. So those are all available in our resource list in the handouts pod. The REMS-TA Center is a resource as well. We're only an email or a phone call away, so please reach out if you have any technical assistance requests on any aspect of emergency management planning. And thank you so much for attending today's webinar and engaging with us, and thank you so much to our guest presenters, Charlesa and Brian from USDA FNS. We really appreciate everyone's participation here today, and we hope to see you all again at another webinar or hear from you in the future. We'll now be heading over to our community of practice to continue answering any questions via a web chat. Thanks again.